In Part 2, we became familiar with the wealth, power, and size of Atlantis' army. Yet, their abundance and might turned into pride and greed, and their attack on Athens became a clear sign of their moral decay. Now, in Part 3, we will explore how and why Atlantis vanished in a single night. We will trace secrets hidden for millennia and examine the boundaries between history and myth. Get ready, because this is not just the fall of an empire. It's an extraordinary journey at the edge of history and myth. Atlantis' conflict with the Greek people, especially Athens. According to Plato, the story of Atlantis reached him through Solon. While in Egypt, Solon was told by the priests of the ancient city of Sais a truth long forgotten by human memory but preserved on papyri. According to the priests, Atlantis was not merely a wealthy island kingdom located in the middle of the distant ocean. It was also a superpowered empire that played a significant role in the fate of the ancient world. The priests explained that Atlantis once dominated countless islands and vast regions along the coasts of the Mediterranean. Its political control stretched from Libya to the borders of Egypt, and in Europe, its influence reached as far as Tyrrhenia, the land of ancient Etruria. The peoples of these vast territories recognized the power of Atlantis, paid it tribute, and provided warriors for its army, ships for its navy, livestock for its economy, and all other resources required. However, the priest's words carried a deeper warning. The Atlantean civilization, as powerful as it was, had also become dangerous. Their desire for conquest no longer served merely security or economic needs. It was a reflection of the moral decay occurring within their souls. The Atlantean rulers, descended from Poseidon, gradually drifted away from their divine heritage, and ambition, greed, boundless desire, and attachment to material power grew within them. These changes corrupted their character, displacing the wisdom and justice that had once governed them. Thus, this great civilization, once ruled by harmony, slowly became enslaved to its own ambitions. The most dangerous consequence of this moral decay was a shift in Atlantis' target. No longer content with small islands or weak states, they decided to subjugate Athens, the most organized and powerful polis of the ancient world. According to the priests, Athens at that time was not the city we know from later centuries. The ancient Athens described by Plato was not a state based on wealth, luxury, or military power, but a completely different, ideal state. Here, authority was held not by money or nobility, but by reason and law. People valued living in harmony with nature rather than amassing wealth. Military power existed not for glory, but to protect peace and order. Morality, justice, and living free from wrongdoing were considered the highest values. The laws and principles bestowed upon them by the goddess Athena formed the foundation of society. The citizens lived simple lives, perfected themselves through labor and service, and treated one another with respect. In this polis, each individual gained worth through wisdom, diligence, and righteousness. In this sense, Athens was not only a political structure, but also a moral ideal. In Plato's vision, it served as an example of how a state should be. Thus, a great confrontation was set to emerge between the uncontrolled ambitions of Atlantis and the moral purity of Athens. This was no longer merely a war over land or power. It was a clash between two distinct worldviews. On one side, unrestrained power and materialism. On the other, law, order, and morality. The outcome of this confrontation would determine the fate of the ancient world. The rulers of Atlantis sent envoys to Athens. They did not merely issue a call. They also displayed power and instilled fear. The envoys informed the Athenians that Atlantis was no longer content with just its islands and nearby territories. Their goal was to subjugate Athens, the greatest and most orderly polis of the ancient world. They demanded that Athens surrender its freedom, acknowledge the superiority of Atlantis, pay tribute, and supply resources to its armies. However, the Athenians responded to this call with calm but resolute determination. They openly declared that they would never surrender their freedom to any force. For Athens, freedom meant not just land and wealth, but also morality, law, and the order bestowed by the gods. They knew that no foreign domination could destroy their ideal city. This decision did not remain mere words. The Athenians immediately took action, preparing for the forthcoming war. Atlantis, however, had no intention of retreating. According to Plato, the Atlantean army was immense in both size and strength. Thousands of war chariots, tens of thousands of infantry, powerful cavalry units, and a massive navy displayed the city's might. Their fleet could sail across the ocean and blockade enemy shores. Ships were continuously built, weapons produced, and food supplies stocked. Every soldier was equipped with the most advanced arms: bronze armor, swords, spears, shields, siege engines, and catapults. Every detail demonstrated the army's level of preparedness. The Athenians, however, understood that Atlantis would surpass them in numbers and resources. Therefore, a general mobilization was declared throughout the city. Every adult male capable of bearing arms joined the ranks. The city's defenses were strengthened, walls were reinforced, additional fortifications constructed, and supplies of food and weapons stockpiled. Yet Athens' strength did not lie solely in walls and weapons. The Athenians relied on unity, courage, and the support of the gods. They understood that war was not only a matter of force. Wise leadership, the solidarity of citizens, and moral principles were also key to victory. They defended not only themselves, but also their ideals. Freedom, justice, and respect for the law were Athens' greatest weapons. At this moment, as Plato describes, two different worlds collided. On one side, Atlantis, acting out of pride and greed as a result of gradual moral decay. On the other, Athens, the ideal polis built upon law, justice, and devotion to the gods. This clash was not merely military. It was also a moral and ethical trial. The first phase of the war began with Atlantis' naval blockade. The Atlantean fleet was magnificent and enormous. Thousands of warships, cargo vessels, and military cutters advanced toward the shores. The objective was clear: to deprive Athens of supplies and trade, weaken the city from the open sea, and conquer it in a short time. But the Athenians were prepared. They had built fast, agile, and lightweight ships. These vessels had maneuvering advantages against Atlantis' heavy and tall warships and were adapted for coastal combat. The naval battles were fierce and prolonged. The Atlanteans, superior in number but sometimes slow and less maneuverable, operated mainly in open waters. The Athenians, however, skillfully used their knowledge of the coastline. At night, they ambushed enemy ships, attacked from concealment among the rocks, moved quickly using swift boats, and blocked the enemy's advance in unexpected places. Night attacks, sudden ambushes, and maritime tricks confused the Atlantean strategy, and their massive ships were repeatedly damaged. After several major defeats, the Atlanteans realized that conquering Athens from the sea was impossible. The fleet withdrew, and as a new strategy, they shifted to land operations. The main force of their army landed on the shores of Attica and advanced toward the city walls. The Atlanteans believed that with their great power and colossal army, they would capture Athens in a short time. But the Athenians had already calculated everything. To strengthen the city's defense, they skillfully used their strategic advantages. Mountain passes and hills were fortified, roads were blocked with barriers, and in some passages hidden mines and traps were laid. Defensive positions were established on every ridge and every hill. Athenian soldiers were trained to make sudden attacks, set ambushes, and disrupt supply lines. The land battles lasted for months. The Atlanteans, accustomed to short and swift victories in the past, now had to shed blood for every step they took. They lost soldiers in the mountains, their massive army divisions grew exhausted in continuous assaults, and they faced shortages of weapons and provisions. The Athenians, on the other hand, withdrew after each attack but struck back from well-chosen positions, destroyed the enemy's communication and supply lines, and prepared ambushes for the next assault. No matter how strong the Atlanteans were, the prolonged war weakened them. Numerical superiority lost its significance. Every loss created gaps in the army, and even discipline honed over centuries grew weary in the face of such extraordinary and persistent resistance. They realized that conquering Athens could not be achieved by brute force alone. Capturing a city protected by clever strategy, intimate knowledge of the land, and the courage of its citizens remained nothing but a dream. The Atlanteans launched their assault on the Greeks. The Athenians applied the tactics they had learned from long-standing confrontations. Through feigned retreats, they lured the main forces of Atlantis into a narrow valley. The valley had been prepared in advance for an ambush. From three sides, archers, slingers, and infantry units stood ready to strike. Relying on their numerical advantage, the Atlanteans attempted to advance out of the valley, but the terrain restricted them. Heavy infantry and war chariots struggled on narrow and steep paths, severely limiting maneuverability. The Athenians exploited this masterfully. Their attacks were successive and purposeful. They stood like an unbreakable wall before the enemy, striking every mover and responding to every provocation. The battle raged for days and nights. Every corner of the valley was under Athenian control, while the enemy slowly dwindled. The Atlantean army's supplies were cut off, and their communication with the fleet was severed. The remaining forces were in panic. Finally, with the decisive attack, the Atlantean army was completely surrounded, with no possibility of resistance left. At the same time, drama unfolded along the coast. Athenian light ships attacked the Atlantean fleet. Ships anchored in the harbor caught fire, heavy transport vessels sank, and the Atlanteans' chance to escape by sea was completely eliminated. The enemy survived only in fragmented groups and by fleeing, suffering significant losses in the process. The remnants of the Atlantean army were scattered, their lines broken, and they retreated in panic. Their great ambition for conquest ended this time in defeat. Yet the Athenians, having won the victory, did not act harshly. They did not pursue the fleeing, nor did they make demands on the vanquished. This victory was not merely a physical triumph. It was proof that a city built on morality, unity, and adherence to the law could overcome a state corrupted by material greed and the lust for power. Thus ended the war between Athens and Atlantis. The victorious Athens became a symbol of a society that did not place wealth and power above all else. They safeguarded not only their lands and borders, but also their freedom, laws, and moral principles. In contrast, Atlantis, consumed by its desire for wealth and domination, succumbed to moral decay and inevitably declined. This war demonstrated for history that victory does not come solely from force or numerical superiority. It comes from justice, unity, civic courage, and fidelity to the law. Material advantage cannot withstand moral weakness. True strength arises from moral and ethical foundations. Atlantis had unparalleled power, with vast lands, waterways, and resources. Every river and crop brought abundance. Every mountain and valley provided perfect defense. Yet all this abundance and might clouded their judgment. Questions arose. Why do we desire more if all our needs are already met? If our lands and resources are so plentiful, why covet the territories of others? Instead of seeking answers, the Atlantean rulers made a grave error. They decided not just to protect their own lands, but to subjugate Athens. Abundance and power had given them strength, yet they had also made them captives of pride and greed. This became an irreversible step in their fate. Their mistaken decision was not merely political or military pressure, but the result of moral decay. Atlantis had ceased to be an ideal civilization and had become enslaved by its own ambitions. Thus, Atlantis' fateful choice led them into war against Athens and forever altered the destiny of the ancient world. Atlantis, despite all its wealth and power, made a grave mistake. It attacked Athens. This war was not merely about land and dominion, but an open manifestation of the civilization's moral decline. Pride, greed, and ethical corruption weakened their spirit, ultimately opening the doors to an irreversible catastrophe for the great civilization. This decision demonstrated that power and wealth, if not supported by morality and order, are enough to destroy a civilization. Atlantis would henceforth remain only a legend in history, yet the lessons drawn from it are eternal for humanity. In Part 4, we will explore the causes of Atlantis' downfall, the natural disasters, and the intervention of the gods. We will also see how the traces of this civilization were preserved over millennia and continued to live on in myths.